Hello and welcome to another episode of the Chrissie Mayr podcast. We are on iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, and SoundCloud. And if you're listening to us right now on iTunes, please go and leave a 5-star review. That's right. I'm going to read your review no matter what it says, just as long as it's 5 stars. Quick shout out to our sponsor, Cushy Dreams. They are my go-to for all things CBD related. If you're feeling anxious, if you feel like the last year kind of tripped you out like it did me, I highly recommend their CBD products. You can enjoy all the benefits of CBD without getting high whatsoever. Everything has under 0.3% THC. It's a full lineup of premium smokable CBD. They specialize in extraordinary CBD-rich hemp flower, also known as bud, in cans, and they also do these pre-roll CBD joints, which I really like. There's different indica sativa blends. So if you want to feel a little bit more up, you maybe go for like the hustle, the energy, a strand like that. But if you want to have a little bit before bed and relax, like you could do the relax, you could do the dream, you can do the peace. So whatever you want to do, Cushy Dreams has your back. I know it helps me sleep at night. I'll just have a little bit of the dream. Like I personally really love this 5-pack that they sell. It's just like, and I don't even smoke a whole joint, to be honest. Like, it's very tidy. If it's in my purse, I'm just a big fan. It's very chic. And yes, it's cannabis that ships directly to you. It's legal in all 50 states. Looks, smells, feels just like high quality marijuana, but it's not going to get you high, which is great. Because sometimes you want to get some things done with your day. Join the men and women who are sick of vapes and gummies and want to smoke their CBD. It's 100% hand trimmed, high quality stuff, never machine trimmed. They constantly do independent lab tests to show compliance, purity. All of this can be found on their website, cushydreams.com. That's KUSHY dreams.com. Best of all, it's grown here in the USA. I mentioned the different blends like energy, hustle, relax, dream, peace. So go to cushydreams.com and get you some high quality CBD right now. At checkout, use promo code CMP. You're going to get 20% off your whole order. Really quick, I'm going to be doing stand-up in a city near you. This weekend, I'm going to be at the Comedy Cove, Scotty's Comedy Cove in Springfield, New Jersey, doing shows at 9 p.m. on Friday and Saturday night. That's May 21st and 22nd. And then I'm heading to Cleveland, Ohio to do Hilarities Comedy Club on Thursday, June 3rd. For tickets and details, go to my website, chrissiemayr.com. Yes, the shows have been really, really fun so far. I really appreciate and adore all the fans that I've met so far, fans of mine, just fans of comedy in general, free speech. It's been really great. So I very much appreciate every one of you that has come out to a show already. Okay, I'm so excited to have this girl on the podcast today. She is the executive director for Feminists for Liberty. Very excited to have her on. Kat Murti. I hope I'm saying that right.
Yes, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
I am excited to have you. I very much love the lipstick, the red lip. I was all about the red lip, I think, in 2019 and prior, and then 2020 hit, and I just was like, I lost my, I don't know. I just lost the ability to do red lipstick every day. I would get upset and depressed. It was very much my signature look. And then I was like,
not so much anymore. Well, when it's behind a mask, it almost isn't worth it, right? I almost feel like I've forgotten how to draw a straight eyeliner line after this past year.
And you do a lovely cat eye, which I love. Like, I feel like we have the same sort of like general aesthetic. Like I'm getting like a pinup vibe from you.
Got that classic rockabilly thing.
Yeah. I feel like there's pictures of you like tattooed on men's arms. Like that's the vibe I'm getting. I love the stripes. I love the bangs. I love all of it so much. So good. Okay. Where do you live right now? Do you live in a state that's lifting restrictions?
Sort of. So I live in the state of Maryland, just outside of DC. So we've been sort of in a weird limbo basically the whole time. Both because it's a limbo between states and also just like DC is DC. DC is its own weird swamp.
What is it about DC that makes it feel like so like cold and sort of like soulless? Is that just because that's where all of our leaders live?
Right, right. Yeah, it's the seat of power, the seat of evil. It's a city full of class presidents, is what they call it,
Ugh, of
or Hollywood for
course.
ugly people.
Yes, everybody right now listen to this thinks of their class president and they're like nobody liked that person. Like, yeah, like some of them were popular, maybe some of them were smart, but it's like, ugh, you couldn't really like be yourself around them. I hope you weren't a class president.
I was, in fact, not my class president.
Okay.
I did edit the newspaper, so I'm not sure if that helps, but
You do have a newspaper vibe to you, but like a cool newspaper editor.
I look like I like to hang out late at night with my computer because that's accurate.
Yeah, I tried to join the newspaper in college and I just was like, oh, this is a lot more work than I thought. I just like wanted to see my name in the paper, but I was like, yeah, I wasn't really cut out for that. Did you find yourself like in high school being, wanting to be politically active, or did you feel like it
Yes,
came through later on?
very. For me, it actually came through like just from childhood. I'm not sure that there was a moment when I wasn't. I mean, probably toddlerhood, but I basically my entire childhood, moving on up, was this slow and steady march where I would find out things were illegal and be like, why? That makes no sense. And then
Oh wow, so you're a libertarian
on.
at the gate.
Basically, yeah, I didn't know I was a libertarian until I was 15 because I didn't know what a libertarian was. I actually had it in my mind. I was going to see, I was trying to read up as much as I could about different types of political theory, political philosophy, and I just wasn't finding anything that sounded like what I thought. So I was like, okay, great. I need to spend all of my time researching all of these thoughts and things like that. And then I'm going to write this manifesto and I'm going to explain to people why freedom is so great. And then I was 15 years old. I was on a weed messaging board, fits well with your CBD
Wow.
ad.
So cool. You're so cool at such a young age.
Oh yeah, hanging out on listservs and messaging boards, super cool. But I was on this cannabis messaging board and I was talking about how, yes, all drugs should be legal because you own your body. It's a victimless crime. There's all of these problems with the drug war. But I was concerned about how taxation and regulation would look in a legal world. And
at 15 years old, you're saying, all right, so you should have been class president because you sounded way smarter than average. I
like DC because people will nerd out with you and then you realize it's 4 a.m. and they still want to talk to you about policy. And you're like, okay, no, something else, please.
Wow, good for you.
No, someone on this board, they're like, oh, you sound like a libertarian. And I was like, I don't know what that is. So they sent me the 4-way political quiz. I was a libertarian. I Googled it and ended up on the Cato website, actually, and started reading. And I was like, oh, these people agree with me. They're saying the things that I've been saying that no one else seems to be saying. So
there's a group for it. Yeah.
Yep.
Was this a departure from how you were raised politically or what you heard your your parents or family talking about as you were growing up?
So yes and no. Yes and no. My family is very open, lots of political discussion, certainly on both sides of my family, very involved in and interested in politics. Both of my sets of grandparents were very involved in, so my family's from India. Both of my sets of grandparents were very involved in, and great-grandparents, the Indian independence movement. And then basically like from the time I was a small child, we get together and we talk about politics, we argue about politics. It's fun. I don't know. No one was like explicitly libertarian. And certainly like we get together, we discuss things. Definitely a lot of folks more on the liberal side, some folks more on the conservative side, and just sort of all over the place. But one of the things I like about being a libertarian is you can find that common ground with just about anyone. So I think amongst the most radical and the most centrist at the same time.
Yeah, you can kind of really talk to anybody. That's what I appreciate about being a libertarian as well. Like I really feel like I can see I can see all sides. Like in college, I was very super liberal, very lefty, very social justice warrior. And then like now I've been sort of like a lot of my friends are like more right wing. So I see that point, but I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, I see where I stop on certain issues. But that's so interesting. So you said your grandparents were Indian?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So all of
Not
my,
Native American or like,
no, like from India,
oh my
all of
God. So
my,
wait, what else are you? Or are
I
you?
am entirely Indian. I actually, I'm a U.S. citizen, was born in the U.S., but I spent about half and half time growing
Oh.
up there and here up until I was about 16. And
Do you
then,
get that a lot? Do you get people being like, "What are you?" Like I
yes,
just
all the time,
like,
all
where
the
do you
time.
put
And I
it?
get all sorts of different things, and it's never Indian. It's actually funny. My husband is Latino. He's mainly Mexican, and I'm Indian, and I've spent my entire life with everyone. So I get all sorts of things. People think I'm Russian. They think I'm Lebanese. They think I'm Turkish. But probably the most common is people think I'm Mexican. And
Oh, it
he
must be the
is
bangs.
actually almost entirely Mexican. And he spent his entire life with everyone thinking he's Indian. So,
Oh wow, so you're a perfect match.
right. Yeah. Star-crossed right there.
And so okay, so you're at a very young age. I didn't even know what libertarianism was really until like
I
my
doubt I would have
20s.
found it if it weren't for that for that messaging board, because like I was searching, like reading all sorts of stuff. I read the Communist Manifesto at 12 and I was like, oh,
What?
these are
Okay,
some nice ideas.
you're
And
a
then I
whiz
started, and
kid.
I was like, let me look at this communism thing. And then I start looking at it like, oh no, these are not nice ideas. These do not play out well. I was like, oh, well, maybe I'm a progressive. Like, it seems like they're anti-drug war, seems like they like immigration. And I was like, and they seem to really like the nanny state, so maybe not so much.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
Me
then,
too. I thought I was progressive because I was like, well, I love the gays and I think they should be
yes,
able to do whatever the
exactly,
hell they
exactly.
want.
It's like, well, those
Yeah.
things sound great. And then, oh, but as soon as the policy is something you don't like, out comes the boot. That's a problem for me.
Yeah. And like, and now it became very clear with like the sort of like the First Amendment freedom of speech becoming in danger. I was like, okay, all right. I feel like I know where I'm called to kind of like fight right now. So
Yeah, yeah.
you're so young. You know what being a libertarian is. When most people at 15 are just figuring out hand jobs, you're like reading books. You're I mean, not
A
that you
little bit
were
of both, maybe.
not that you were not. Yeah, you're like sounds like you're just doing it all. You're like wise beyond your years. So at what point did you think like, oh, I might also be a feminist?
Yeah. So I actually think like as I said, I think I've probably always been a libertarian. I just didn't know what it was. I think I've also always been a feminist, but people know that word, they hear that word. And so I always I can't remember a time in my life when I was like, no, I'm not a feminist, right? Now, maybe I've learned a lot more about feminism over the years. I've learned about different schools of feminism and different approaches and that kind of thing. But just really at the base core, this idea that people should be treated equally, should have equal opportunities, that the law shouldn't treat you differently based upon your sex or your gender. Like that was a no-brainer for me. Certainly helps that I'm a girl. So certainly in
Yeah.
my self-interest, at least when I was young and looking at it from that perspective. And so
And it's so easy when you're young to be, or at least for me, it was very easy for me to be pro-choice. And like I fell into feminism like so easily because I was just like, oh, I don't see myself being a homemaker. And of course, all these ideas are coming up. Like I'm in college. I ended up being a women's studies minor, which is like, nothing to brag about, whatever. It's 4 classes, big deal. But I was just here I am, and I think a lot of women too, they find themselves in college. It's like, well, I'm already here getting this education. My parents are spending all this money.
mhm.
It seems easy for you to kind of shit on the women who like opt out of college. Like I very much remember being in that mindset of like, no, I'm like better than women who choose to stay home because I am in college. I'm trying to get a degree. Like I remember very much like looking down at women that
I don't know.
didn't want it. It was easy for me to be like, ugh, like to just shit on more women that want to be
definitely,
traditional.
I see where that comes from. I'm not sure I've ever quite felt that way. I guess I always wanted to do both, like I wanted both in my life. For me, at least, it never really felt like college was a choice so much as just something that my parents were talking to me about when I was 4 years old.
You have to go. Yeah.
You have to go. Here's how you're going to go. Think about these things. But actually, abortion was an interesting one because you said you were pro-choice. And so that's one of those issues where I was pretty, I had like pretty pro-life views when I was younger. And it was kind of when I was in my teens, I was having a conversation with an aunt of mine about abortion and about the particular cases in which someone might choose it, et cetera, that I kind of got to that point where I was like, oh, I can see this is something where we don't really want the state involved. And so that's sort of where I am now. Like I'm personally pro-life, but I don't think that the state should be a part of that role, right? I think that that's a decision for someone. I think that's something that we can make an environment in which people might be less likely to choose abortion, but I certainly don't want anyone being forced into
one way or the other.
Birth, right?
Yeah, I'm definitely more pro-life now. Like just probably really in the last I guess 5-6 years. I've just, and I don't know if it's a getting older thing, but I still feel like, all right, yeah, it would be ideal to have women, and I'm so fortunate that I was never in a position to make that call. I have friends who have had abortions, and no one feels great after doing it. They're anywhere from like bothered to traumatized, after they do it.
It's never a situation that someone finds themselves in because they wanted to be there.
Oh, it's heartbreaking. I had this girlfriend not even that long ago, like maybe 5 years ago. She was like dating this guy. She wasn't like young either. She was like in her early 30s. She definitely wanted to have a baby. She really wanted it to work out with this guy. And the guy, I remember she told the guy that she was pregnant. He was like, ugh. And like she did not get a good response from him. And then she terminated the pregnancy. And it like really bothered her so much because it's like, oh my God, this is a woman who wants to have a baby.
And, and I think also the way that society makes us think about this, particularly when you're in your 30s and looking at it, you're also there's that thing in the back of your head thinking like, maybe this is my one chance. And it's so much pressure. And the problem is, I mean, like you said, I don't know this friend of yours. I don't know the guy, but
she's never going to watch my she doesn't watch my stuff. I haven't talked to her in a while.
I'm happy when my friends don't watch my stuff. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I feel like there's just so many situations too where unfortunately someone might say that they would act in one way, and then you get to that point, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I had no part in this. You do this. You take care of it. And
you mean a man? Like,
yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes either way, right? Like we really don't know how you're going to feel in that situation or what you're going to do. I actually feel like I've gotten more pro-choice over time. In part because like, as I've been getting older, it's like, oh, this would be so much easier for me now. I'm actually 8 months pregnant. So it is.
Oh, that's right. Of course.
So much easier for me right now.
I think on your Twitter or your Instagram.
This was a planned, wanted baby, but
yay, congrats. How are you feeling?
I'm good. I'm really excited, actually. I'm about a couple weeks out and very nervous and very excited at the same time. But it's one of those things where it's like, if there had been an accident, if it was an oops, etc., like I feel like I'm at a point in my life where it would be so much easier for me to just like, it's fine. I can do this. I'm fine. And then I think of like how many girls I know getting pregnant at 15, 16, and it's your life changed.
Devastating. Yeah.
Totally. Right. Like that's just such a different situation. Or I've had, unfortunately, a couple friends who, wanted baby, and then something happens, and then you find out like, oh, this baby's going to be born without a heart or something like that. And that's just like, it's one of those things where it's like, you can think what you're going to do, and you don't know.
Yeah, you don't know until you're in that position, and it's like, I should really like talk to her because I know her plan was like to move out of New York she was a nurse, so I'm like, I'm sure she has no problem getting a job anywhere. To move out of New York back to Texas, and her plan was to become like a single mom because she just like really wanted to have a kid. So I remember when she moved, I was like, I hope she meets somebody, like, not because everybody needs to have a man, but like it's so hard to just raise a baby
So hard.
by
No, I mean,
yourself.
I think about this all the time. Like, it would be so much harder if I were in a different situation than it is now.
Wow. Well, I'm excited. So when is your due date?
I'm due June 9th, so it's literally like T minus.
Oh my gosh, this is like 2 weeks. Wow.
Yeah, I know. Don't remind me. I'm like realizing how much I have left to do, and at the end of the day, it's all like it's his choice when he's being born. I have I get no say in that. So,
do you believe that babies like choose their parents? And
I don't know. Yeah, maybe. I wouldn't write it off.
Like I've read that somewhere. Yeah, like that the baby souls, like they just you're supposed to learn the lessons you're supposed to learn like in your life, and you choose your parents because you know that this childhood or these personalities like will help you learn
this is the right path.
Your lessons. Yeah.
I guess I do. I mean, this isn't so much politics or things like that, but just worldview. Yeah, I guess I do think that there's like a path for everybody, and you may not know that path, but that path it's there, it's calling to you, and you're going to go on it. Actually, so I'm a Hindu. And this is one of those things where I like one of those like Zen koans that I like to think about sometimes is like, am I a libertarian because I'm Hindu, or am I Hindu because I'm a libertarian? Of course, like for me, it's not like I didn't convert to Hinduism. I was raised a Hindu, etc. But like there's this idea in Hinduism that we all have our own like dharma or our life path. And it's sort of, there's a general path that most people have, but what yours is individually kind of depends, right? And so you get karma, which most people karma based on like
or past life, right?
But it's different for different people because like different people have a very different role in life, and they have different experiences and different things that they need to do, right? Which I think is really like also a very libertarian idea. It's this idea that like each separate person, they're on a different path, and that you don't really know for that person what their right and wrong is, and what they should be doing, and what they should be choosing, and how they should make their way through life, right? And so
is the basic idea of that like don't prevent somebody from making a bad choice because maybe they need to hit that rock bottom to then be propelled to
sometimes and, one person's rock bottom might be someone else's like greatest win. You don't know.
Or like regular
lots of people make choices that I wouldn't.
Somebody's rock bottom is another person's just good weekend.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I'm thinking of just my friend Gino, who gets blackout drunk every time I see him. But that is so interesting. Like are there similarities between like Hinduism and libertarianism, or like you were talking about how one perhaps like informed the other?
Yeah, no, well, see, this is just one of those things that I like to like sit around and think about, when I'm just feeling, navel gazing about, because I'm always like, I like both of these belief systems really like are the way that I think. And I always kind of go like, okay, am I more like this? Am I more libertarian because I'm Hindu, or am I more Hindu because I'm libertarian? Hinduism, like I said, it's sort of like there's different paths. So there's many different varieties and flavors of it. But you know what? The same's true with libertarianism. You could be a left libertarian, you could be a right libertarian. It's just sort of, you can have, for instance, like very socially conservative views and be a libertarian. You just can't force other people to do those things, right?
What do you say to people who like assign libertarianism as to be like more of a right wing, or like an uber, like more right than a regular right wing?
Yeah. So I get pretty frustrated with the whole like right versus left discourse that happens around libertarianism a lot. Specifically, people often call me a left libertarian, and I'm not a left libertarian. I'm a pretty hardcore, super into capitalism. So like I actually am kind of on that right, but I think it's got to
be the bangs and the makeup that makes people think that you're
makeup. And then people are always like, but you're always talking about like immigration and drug policy and feminism and LGBT rights. I'm like, yeah, those are just libertarian positions, right? That's not what moves you on this thing. But I think people sort of superimpose the American political spectrum, and they have this idea of like, oh, okay, you're right wing, so you hate the gays and hate immigration and love free markets, which is of course like not quite how that works. Or like, you love trans rights, you must be a communist on the other side, and like that's not exactly how it happens.
So it seems like, you knew kind of early on where you stood politically. If somebody's watching this and they're like, oh God, I'm in my 20s or 30s or 40s, and I still kind of don't really know where I fall, like, what do you recommend? What sort of guidance do you recommend for somebody to figure out, like, oh, well, what am I? Like, not all my beliefs kind of line up with one group.
Well, I think it's pretty unusual for anybody to fit entirely in one group, right? But we're all at the end of it, we're individuals, we have different experiences, the world reacts to all of us very differently. And I think that kind of informs the way that we think about things. And so I don't know if anyone like really clearly 100% always agrees with one thing. In my own life, I try to judge most policies in terms of if I think they're liberty maximizing or liberty minimizing. But good. Certainly for anybody, I think it's okay to find the path that's right for you. And it's important that you find the path that's right for you. It's just also important to understand that other people are on a different path, and it's good to give them, leeway to discover that for themselves. I think what's really important at the end of it is that you don't use force. You don't try to force other people to do something or to be something or to make certain decisions, that you let people have that leeway to choose for themselves what's right for them. And, what's good for one person is not going to be good for someone else. What one person is good at is not going to be something that someone else is good at. And I think the world is a better place because of it. I think that sort of like that difference, it makes it interesting. Like, we don't want to live in the world of The Giver, for instance, that old children's book. I don't know if you've read it, but
I've read The Giving Tree.
Yes. So The Giver is like very different. I feel like The Giving Tree has this weird like communist message, although I always
it was terrible. Everyone's taking chunks out of the damn tree until it's a stump. And then I was like,
yeah, right. I'm never sure if that's supposed to be a positive or a negative. It seems like a terrible thing to me, honestly. But The Giver is the other way. There's this world. It's a young adult novel or something like that, but it's basically a world in which everyone is the same to the point where they all see in black and white. There's no color. Which I'm sorry, I gave away a spoiler.
Spoiler alert. If you haven't read it by now,
thing, but
too late, right?
But yeah, like, we don't want to live in a world where everyone's the same. We don't want to live in a world where we all have to wear mouse suits or we pick our haircut off of the chart of 12.
North Korea. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
If you're listening, which you're not, because you're not allowed. When you talk about liberty, seeing policies in terms of like liberty maximizing or liberty minimizing, which I love, with that in mind, what is of most concern to you right now?
Oh, man. That's so hard. That is such a hard thing, right? Because I think, and this is something where libertarians also end up fighting a lot, because they're like, how could you care about X policy when X is happening? And the thing is that like, there's so much happening all the time. And unfortunately, politics is so enshrined in our world. Like, the government has taken over so much of what happens around us that there's not really a way to opt out. Like, every little thing is a part of it. So it's even stuff like, tax day just passed. And I'm not saying this is the most important policy, but like, tax day just passed. And tax policy is one of those things that a lot of people think is like horrifically boring. And like, why are we even talking about this? They consider taxes a fact of life. And what's really interesting, what like fascinates me about tax policy is that the tax code like pushes people to make all of these little choices that they don't even realize that they're making all the time, right? And there's just all of these little nudges in there.
People
And
get married for tax purposes.
Right. When they get married for tax purposes, there's all sorts of stuff in the tax code that's basically meant to incentivize people to live in heterosexual relationships, get married, buy a house, have children, have one partner. Specifically, when the law was written, when the joint tax filing system was written in 1948, it was written specifically because they wanted women out of the workforce. And it still works that way. Women, because of tax policy, women are less likely to work as much as they would like to. And
why is that? Because you can just be a dependent, essentially?
So it has to do with the way that they stack income, essentially. And so the couples who get penalized the most, actually, this is fascinating, are the couples that are both earning around the same amount.
Oh, snap.
So if you have like a small Etsy business or something like that, you're probably going to get a benefit out of getting married. But if you and your partner are both working full time in around the same type of career, et cetera, you actually tend to get nicked on it. But see, so that's one of those things where it's like a lot of people will look at them and be like, why do you care about tax policy? You know, people are getting locked in cages. And of course, like, I think it's horrific that people are getting locked in cages. I'm a huge immigration advocate. I think it's horrific that people are getting bombed. I think all of these things are terrible. But the thing is that there's not like any one part of it that you can really, at the end of the day, be like, oh, we'll just go here and fix this. I think you really need to be focusing on all of these different things all the time and looking for those wins where you can make them.
Because they're all, it sounds like they're all attached, is what you're saying.
They're all attached. Yeah, definitely. You know, incentives matter. And these incentives are baked into these tiny little things we don't even think about all the time.
Wow. I feel like I don't know anything about taxes. And it's like, and you know, they don't tell you, like, yeah, like if you make the same as your dude, like maybe don't get married. Like, oh, I feel like,
yeah, no, it's actually true. For some people, you will actually do worse off if you get married than if you don't.
Yikes. Oh my God. I wish someone told me that in college. I'd be like, you know what? I'm just going to like really perfect this cupcake recipe. And
I'm good. I'm set.
Oh God. Yeah. I don't know. It was wild. Like I look back, I'm like, I feel like college was kind of a scam for me personally, because it's like I wasn't like, gotta be a nurse, gotta be a doctor, I have to be a dentist. Like there was no like trade that I was like fired up to do. I just thought like getting vague entertainment jobs or being an assistant was going to lead to something really great. And like fast forward, like don't become an assistant unless you are okay with being trapped as being an assistant for like forever. The rest of your career.
That I think is the biggest problem with our educational system, right? Like there's just there's this big like treadmill that's pushing you into, okay, you need to graduate from high school, then you need to get an undergraduate degree, and now really and then you need to get a master's degree. I jumped off that treadmill after my undergrad, but a lot of people here in DC get a PhD, all sorts of things, and there's not really an end purpose for it. There's not really any sort of like, oh, okay, and what are you going to do with this?
It's like the new bachelors, it sounds like.
Right. That's exactly what's going on, right? Like the same jobs that you used to get with no diploma or with a high school diploma, now there's people with master's degrees who are going after those same jobs. And the only difference is they're going to get it because they have that additional thing. But at the end of the day, they can't even pay back their student loans. So that's a huge problem. And we don't even, the way that the education system is built, there's no focus on like, oh, okay, so what are you going to do? What skills do you need? What would be helpful? I think that there's a whole lot of value in a liberal arts education in the traditional sense, like having a grounding in all these different subjects. Like it's important to understand like the basics of history, the basics of math, the basics of science, those kinds of things, because without them, it's really easy to get the wool pulled over your eyes. But I think that there needs to be some sort of like practical pragmatism, right? Like, why are we never learning in school, oh, okay, here's how you set up a retirement account. Here's how mortgages work. Like, that's all stuff that they could easily teach in like high school, and they could teach it as part of the curriculum, right? Like
Yeah,
that
you
could be
should
something where
not
like
be
in math
swimming in
class,
debt.
you're learning about compounding interest.
Yeah. Here's how to write a check even. I mean, like, not so much now, but like, here's
I
how
have
to
to
like,
tell you, my bank account does not come with a checkbook. I
um,
have to get a different bank account if I want to use checks now.
I can't remember the last check. Oh, probably when God, it had to have been at least like 7 years ago. Wow.
Every time someone asks me for a check, which is like rarely, like every few years or something, I'm like, are you serious? I have to go to the bank. I have to like go buy a cashier's check. Like I don't have checks. No one uses checks. Can I
Cash App already?
You?
Yeah. I was really resonating with what you were saying about like this pressure to get a master's degree. Cause I remember I was like 24, 25. I was dating this guy. People who listen to the podcast probably can figure out who he is. But like I met him. He was going to Columbia, met him in New York, and then he moved to DC to pursue this like wind energy job.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember this was during the brief period of time, like before he dumped me via Skype. Between that and like I would be taking buses back and forth to visit him. I was like, gotta get that $1 bus ticket to visit this guy who's gonna dump me over Skype. But before that happened, he was like really pressuring me to get a master's degree. And like kind of, I really felt like he was kind of shaming me and kind of like looking down his nose at me, like, ugh, your BA in communications. Like, what are you going to do with it? Like, you should really, and I think maybe I went to one open house or something. Like I was starting to look into it because I'm like, oh, this guy kind of like thinks I'm shit without it. And then I thought about being like, I was like, should I be a massage therapist? Do I need like a trade? And I just remember I was like really considering what a huge expensive mistake that would have been. Like, thank God he broke up with me, because I would have imagined like what a terrible reason to go get another degree is because you just don't want to lose a man, you know?
Guy, right?
It all worked out. He got hit by a bus riding his bike in DC. He's fine. But just enough for me to be like, oh, karma's real. Karma is real, baby. He's fine. He's married. I haven't checked up on him in a while, but he's living the dream, I guess. I'm over it. I'm definitely over it. This is so long ago. Okay, cool. Yeah, we're talking about advanced degrees. Yeah, I really feel for people who are like, I was just bachelor's amount of in debt, and then my grandma died like a while ago, so she helped me pay off like the last whatever 10 grand it was. But I really feel for people who are in like 100K plus
in a hole,
in debt. Like that's,
and they're not able to get a job that's going to help pay them back, right? Because that's a big part of it. Like that treadmill that we talked about,
like you're promised that
this idea that like you know, and we pretty much had it beaten into our heads from the time that we were young. Like you go there, you get this degree, then you get this degree, then you get this degree, then you coast. Because that was true when not many people are getting those degrees. But when everyone has that degree, it doesn't get you ahead of anyone. It's just like, I can't remember if it's Alice in Wonderland or I think it's Through the Looking Glass, where they have to keep running and running and running to stay in place. And that's exactly what we're doing with degrees. Where like, I think education's really valuable. I think everyone should be a lifelong learner. But just going after these degrees just because it's the next thing that you have to do, or, you know, for a lot of people, it's like, oh, okay, I'm finishing up my undergrad. I don't know what job I want, so I guess I'm going to law school, right? We have that big law school bubble where all of these people, they went to go be lawyers, and now like they're working as public defenders or nothing. Public defenders, bless their hearts, like we need people who will defend people, but they've got like, they're making dollars on the case. They've got a huge caseload. They're probably not able to be great lawyers to their clients. And like, this was the path that they were told was their path out of poverty, and they're never going to be able to pay off those loans. Like, that's hugely frustrating. And a big part of that is actually the federal government. The federal government, you know, by subsidizing these college loans, they've created this bubble where people can take out these huge debts, and then they don't really realize until much later what they're on the hook for. And they never really did that same risk calculus that they might have done. And the cost of college goes up and up and up. In the meantime, like what people are getting for that degree is, you know, over time, just less and less.
And yeah, every job I've ever had, even though it's like, oh, like they're impressed, you interview, okay, BA, it seems like the bare minimum. But every job I've ever had is I've learned it on the job. It was like a lot of assistant jobs, a lot of like Microsoft Office, a lot of just like pretending to give a shit about my boss. Like that's been 90% of every job I've had. It's just like pretend.
It's who's who. That's the biggest part. Like getting a job in a new city is the hardest thing because you don't know anyone yet. And they're looking at one job opens, they've got 1,000 resumes. They're going to immediately call around and say, like, who do you think should get this? Do you have a recommendation? Are they in the pile? Okay, I'll look at this one.
Wow. So, gosh, I feel like I never saw the connections between like libertarianism and feminism, but like now it's like, it seems like so obvious now. What is Feminists for Liberty?
Yeah, so Feminists for Liberty is we're a nonprofit organization. We're pretty grassroots. I started it with my co-founder, who's president, Elizabeth Nolan Brown, a few years ago. We started we started up in 2016 around March or so, kind of in primary season, and then we actually incorporated legally. We did all of that government homework in 2018. But yep, there you go. That was a recent event. Yesterday was tax day, hence why I was talking about taxes.
Boo.
So basically we are a libertarian feminist group. We're uplifting libertarian feminist ideas and voices, and we're anti-sexism, anti-statism, pro-markets, and pro-choice in everything. And so we have all of this. We look at a lot of the same problems that traditional feminists or mainstream feminists might, but we look at them through that libertarian lens where we understand that the state has overwhelmingly, both historically and today, been the biggest oppressor of women and sex and gender minorities, and that the solution for most of these things are cultural and have to do with changing hearts and minds rather than embedding certain things in policy.
That is so interesting because there's this I'm about to sound like such an aunt, but I'm like, I was about to say this lovely young woman I follow. No, she's done my podcast. Her name is Isabella Riley, and she's like really young. She's like 22 or 23, 24. She does these TikToks. It reminded me of that. It's like, oh, like you shit on women who don't want to, like, she was basically making the comparison between like, oh, it's supposedly better that a woman like gets, all these degrees and then has a corporate job and she's like slave to like the state, right? Or her job rather than like, being part of like a traditional family unit and like not working and like, not that, like the concept is like, oh, that you don't want to be a slave to a man, like go get a job, but then you are basically a slave to your corporate job.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think like as a libertarian feminist, I'd say it comes down to choice. We want people to be able, people of all genders, like women, men, everybody who's somewhere in between, to be able to make their own choices for themselves in life. There are certainly some choices that I might think are better choices or worse choices based upon my own personal experiences, but but I think, again, it comes back to what works best for one person may not work best for someone else. So there is this idea a lot of times that feminists want to outlaw being a housewife or something like that. Mm-hmm. I definitely don't. I think that, there's definitely a role for stay-at-home moms, stay-at-home dads, all sorts of things. And I think actually we're moving to a place as a society. And this is one of the good things that I think has come out of the pandemic, is that people increasingly see we don't have to do 9 to 5 in a building stacked up in little boxes on top of each other to be able to be productive or to be able to do or produce or, innovate.
Oh, for sure.
Right? Which we've known for a while, but there's still that old mindset. And I think we're smashing out of that mindset now.
There's no way if we didn't have this pandemic that we'd have collectively come to that realization, because people work from home. It's like, oh, remote, or like, oh, you're on maternity leave. It's like, ooh, it's always like kind of seen like, well, your job better be here when you get back.
Culture of like, you have to be here sitting at this desk between these hours, and we don't actually care what your output is. We care that we see you sitting there. It's just like, that's not actually how work happens. That's not how the best productivity happens. Like, letting people sort of figure out for themselves what's going to work best for them is best for them, but it's also best for society. So I think we're going to find a lot more of these more hybrid models amongst all genders, because I think that I think men want to be around their kids too. I certainly don't think that only women care about children or want to be active parents.
Of course. Yeah. My brother just left his really good civil engineering job, to stay home with his kids, I think this year or last year, because he and my sister-in-law, they just did the math on their childcare, and they were yeah, if you just stay home, it ended up being financially worth it for them, which is I'm sure a lot of guys, I don't know, they would feel I don't know if they'd feel emasculated by that idea. I mean, the job was also stressing him out majorly.
Right. That's one of those things that it's still changing. But I think I think feminists for the most part would say it's a good thing if a man is able to make that decision. I think the people who don't think that men should be able to do that they're kind of more in that anti-feminist camp that has this idea that whether or not this might be the best role for you and your family, you are a man and we have this pre-prescribed role of what you must do and be and say and how you must spend your time. And I'm not really sure that that's actually better for society in any way.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if it's there's even more pressure on men, that they're even more locked into their roles than women.
I feel
in
women, certain ways that's true, right? And why that's true, I think that depends. Part of it is for instance, there's this it's a fairly patriarchal idea, but this idea of legacy and that who men can be, it's so much narrower. Whereas for women, if a woman takes on more masculine traits, maybe she's stepping out of her role. She's expanding. She's doing better than anyone expected of her. But if a man pursues more feminine things, then he's kind of lowering himself. He's being emasculated. He's that kind of thing. So I think that that's certainly at play. But yeah, it's trapping for men. I mean, just think about things I'm sitting here, I'm wearing a pair of pants. I'm very comfortable in them. And I do know straight men who wear skirts or kilts or whatever, but it's the minority.
Really? Just for what? Just lounging around or right.
To
a parade or something?
That's the point though, right? It's just even these little things like that, there's so much less choice of what is acceptable for you to do. And I do think that's bad. Like, we are sort of trapping guys into like, you can only like these few things. You can't do these things. And I think I think that's changing over time. Think about how many men now enjoy like cooking, watching YouTube videos, making tasty food, where like, my father's generation, I certainly know lots of men who enjoy those things, but it's almost like they're sort of bashful and hiding that their hobby is cooking on the weekends or whatever, right? Because it's not acceptable.
Which is crazy, because you look at all the top chefs and it's like, I would say most are men.
So that's interesting, right? That's one of those things where we still do sort of, jobs are very gendered. And again, that's changing. But what's interesting is when those change, the benefits around them change too. So as certain jobs, as they become more associated with women, they become less well-paying. As they tend to become more associated with men, they tend to become more well-paying. And there's a number of different factors around that. A lot of that has to do with just like women give birth and men don't. And a lot of the
wait, what are you saying in 2021 that women give birth and men don't? That people would say that's a controversial statement, Kat.
For the most part, people with a certain set of organs tend to give birth or not, but for the most part, that's what we see with stuff like the wage gap. But it's interesting how we still like have these preconceptions over what's being done. Like, for instance, right now, think about how many articles you've seen about women in STEM and like, are women cut out to be in STEM? Can women be computer programmers?
Not me. Hell no.
About that. Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, not me. I don't want to do that. That's horrible, actually. I can do some very light programming to like keep the website running type stuff. Nothing more, no interest. But like, what's interesting about that is a lot of the first computer programmers were actually women because it was seen as a womanly role. And then it's shifted into being like this men's career. And now it's like this big push to try to get women back into it. And it's fascinating how many times in society these things kind of change. Like even pants, like I said, like pants, skirts were originally more associated with women very farther back in our history. With men. And then pants were more like for women, and then sort of those things have shifted over time. All these like weird things, and then they become baked into our idea of what it means to be a man or a woman. And so that's sort of to bring it back to policy and government and things like that. When we pass policies based upon our current conceptions of what's best or what's most equalizing or things like that, we tend to bake in whatever those conceptions are at the time. So that even touches things like paid leave or things like that, that the people passing it, they have this idea that they're trying to create a more equal society, but they're also, in a way, they're baking in what's happening outside of that, what's happening in the culture that's causing those issues, rather than letting it sort of organically change.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting, because it's like, yeah, you make policy to like adjust to the times, but is that going to be stifling or sort of limiting in the future?
Think about how long it takes for a bill to go into law, right? And then once it does, think about how much longer it takes for that to change.
Oh yeah, I saw Schoolhouse Rock. I know all about it.
Yeah. And Schoolhouse Rock is when it's actually functional and not like our actual Congress. So
take that.
Right. And like you get these things that are locked in forever. Like I said, the joint fund. Go back to taxes again, because I'm so cool. I bring up all the hottest topics, like the joint tax filing system, 1948. They put that in place explicitly because they wanted women who'd gotten into the workforce, Rosie the Riveter, during World War II. They wanted them to go back to being homemakers to free up these jobs for the soldiers returning from the war front.
Makes sense.
And so they explicitly made this joint tax filing system so that it would disincentivize women from working. And, we're like 80 years in the future at this point, and it still does that. And society has completely changed. The average American family still is a dual income family, and it still impacts women specifically in that way, which is fascinating. And no one realizes it because most people aren't weirdos who are interested in tax history.
It's okay though. So it's like, yeah, right. Because if you're with a guy and he's not like, he doesn't have a big money job, you're not going to like give up your job to stay home when your husband's one job is like not going to cut it. So that's really frustrating.
Right, you've got that. And then you've also got the other side of like, let's say that your husband does have a lot of money. It's still a pretty big gamble to leave. And then like, are you then going to be able, like, what freedoms are you losing in your life? Is there going to be an issue? Like, if you want to get back into the career world at some point, like, how hard is it going to be with a 5-10 year gap, 20-year gap on that resume? Like, what are your options at that point? There's a lot going on there.
Yeah, because depending on the job, they're gonna be like, "Oh, why were you not around for 5-10 years?"
Yeah. Do you even know like the newest software that everyone uses now, or whatever it is?
Like PS, they're still using like Windows 95. Like nothing has changed, but they just like they want to get in somebody it's like
AOL mail.
Yeah. They want to get in somebody like younger who isn't going to cost them as much. Yeah. Yeah, it's so tricky. There's so many issues. What do you think people get when they hear, oh, you're a libertarian and a feminist? How do you feel like you're most unfairly judged, or like libertarian feminists in general?
Yeah, definitely. I think it depends on who's doing the judging, because it sort of comes from both sides. So part of what inspired us to start Feminists for Liberty was both what was happening within the feminist movement and also the mainstream understanding of feminism, where you're increasingly seeing this idea that feminism meant that you are a Democrat and that you vote blue and that you support all of these very carceral things that oftentimes are sold as being like this is great for women, and then it's not. These are even laws like SESTA and FOSTA that are like internet regulatory bills, but essentially like have negatively impacted a lot of sex workers, the majority of whom are women. All sorts of things that like, so your mainstream feminism is really just like, they like to say, if you believe that women are people too, you're a feminist. And so we like to say libertarian feminism is the idea that people are individuals and they should be treated that way, right? So that's kind of the difference there. But so on that side, you get that, and you get a lot of people who are feminists and they have this conception of what it means to be a libertarian. And it's something where they really think that, one, they think you're very socially conservative, which is not actually representative of libertarian views. Can't tell you how many times I've seen someone be like, oh, wow, a libertarian who's anti-drug war or a libertarian who's pro-immigration. It's like, yes, those are actually mainstream. Or like a libertarian who's pro-LGBT rights. It's like, those are all like extremely mainstream libertarian views, but that's not what people think it means. They think it means like a Republican, but more conservative. So you get that. And so there are a lot of people who respond negatively that way. We went to a couple of the early women's marches and people are like, oh no, everyone's going to respond poorly to you. But we went there because you meet people where they are. And the number one thing was people coming up to us and being like, either I didn't know that you could be a woman and be a libertarian, which you can, or I thought libertarians hated women. And then we kind of talk to them and be like, oh, wow, yeah, no, these are actually like really interesting, good ideas. So that's on the one side. Then on the other side, you get these libertarians who, or libertarians, pseudo-libertarians, some of them who are really just edgelords who like the idea of that, but aren't maybe so sold on liberty for everyone. They just want liberty for themselves to be not so nice to everyone else. So you get those people who, one, will start saying like, oh, all these feminists who are trying to take over libertarianism or whatever, which is completely against the history of libertarianism, especially American libertarianism. American libertarianism as a movement was largely started by three women, Rose Wilder Lane, Ayn Rand, and Isabel Patterson. They're all fascinating. You should read more about them.
Ooh, I've heard of Ayn Rand.
Yeah.
Not the other one.
Probably the most popular. Of course, she's like
the highest
not a libertarian. She's an objectivist, but close, right? But the other two as well are really interesting women. So like, there's always been women. It's not this boys' club, as they say. Or two, they'll try to say like, oh, all feminists are Marxists, therefore you're a Marxist and you're a communist and you're not a libertarian, which is, again, not true. In fact, what I say all the time, what I argue is that the history of women's rights, for the most part, is actually the history of women gaining access to markets and capitalism. And then using their increased access to markets to push for other rights, which is what we've seen over and over and over again, both currently and otherwise. As women get access to that ability to pay their own way, to make their own choices, that kind of thing, they're then able to use that to push for other equality. And so you certainly get that as well. But fundamentally, I think both mainstream libertarianism and mainstream feminism, the kernel at the center of that is about people should be able to make their own choices. People are not all the same. You cannot collectivize people into one box and say like everybody has to live this way, whether that box is a gender role, whether that box is a state imposed idea of what that'll be, which a lot of times the state has imposed those ideas specifically based around gender or sexuality or sex, right? So these things feed into each other so much. And it's a little disheartening how much people think that they're at odds with each other when in actuality, they're really just about freedom and individual rights.
It seems like the extremes get more attention. It seems like, I don't know, I hate to put this in such generalities, but like most people I feel like believe in a lot of the same things, but it seems like the extremes or the stereotypes get the most attention. So then people feel like we are more at odds with each other the groups are more at odds with each other than they really are.
Well, part of that is that those people who are at the extremes of different things, one, they make for better airtime, and two, it behooves them to argue against the straw man of whatever their opponent is, rather than actually saying like, well, we agree on all of these things. It's on this that I think you're wrong, which, as libertarian feminist, I find myself doing the most of, being like, okay, yeah, I like where you're going. I like where you're thinking on this, but actually this policy that you're supporting, it doesn't work so well, right? Like take things like the opioid epidemic. It's entirely reasonable and good that people are worried about increased overdoses. Overdoses are a bad thing. But the problem is that when they respond with stuff like prescription limits, when they prohibit doctors' ability to treat patients, when they do things like make prescribing caps, all of these kinds of things, what ends up happening, all these prohibitionist policies, what we can see happening, like discernibly in the data, is that we have more deaths. And
Why?
So I think like
because people are not getting what they need.
That disconnect, I think that's kind of where the real story is, and finding like what's going to help people. And so like I honestly think, yes, there are some edge cases of people who want to see the world burn. But for the most part, most people are good people who want the world to be a better place. They just maybe don't see that in the same way as you. And if you can kind of meet them where they are and try to understand why they think the things that they do and what they're trying to do and why, I think it's a lot easier to then find that common ground and start to show them why liberty might be better.
How does curbing like opioid prescriptions result in more deaths? Like, I want to flesh out that example a little more.
Yeah, no, so this is really interesting. There's a couple different ways, right? The first one is that people who are in horrific pain, if you just take away their pain medication from them, they don't cease to be in horrific pain. They're still in horrific pain, just now they're in horrific pain. They can't go to the pharmacy and get this, so they have to start looking around to try to find other ways to deal with it.
They hit their limit because the person doesn't want them to OD on opiates, even though they are truly the person who needs them, and they should be free to have as much as they want.
Well, it's not just that they don't want them to so doctors also are incentivized not to prescribe, even if they understand that this person is using them in a healthful way that's actually making them a more productive and happy member of society. Because if doctors are writing too many prescriptions, as decided by a bureaucrat somewhere probably in DC, they can get raided, they can lose their license, they can go to jail, they can go to prison. They don't want that. So that's a big disincentive, where you end up with situations, really horrible situations, people at end of life, people who have cancer, all sorts of things, who don't have access to these things. And of course, like chronic pain patients, people who are just like, there's this expectation that they're going, that like, oh, you take the pill, then you get better. But not everyone gets better. Some people, like, they need something that they can take at a steady dosage over the course of their life, and they're able to be better while they're taking their medication. But if you take away their medication, they go back to not being so good, right?
Or it's like you said, they go looking for something else.
They go looking for something else. So that's one problem, right? So then they're now going onto the black market. The black market, there's just not the same kinds of, the incentive structure is there for things to be, there's not like a steady dosage. You don't know what's on the label. You don't know what something's been mixed with. A lot of times you're getting something that might be much stronger than what you were getting previously. So those are a problem. Two, you also have the recreational people. The recreational people, they are also still consuming the same amount of drugs, whether or not you make them illegal. But again, they're now consuming much more dangerous drugs. And then sometimes what they end up doing is they've cut down on the number of opioids that are being made, or they cut down on imports and things like that. They do stuff. So then even if there's a limited amount of drugs in the black market for whatever reason, like the borders close and certain drugs can't come across, people still have the incentive to sell these drugs. They don't have a particularly strong incentive outside of their personal morality to make sure that these drugs are pure and that they're safe and things like that. So they'll cut them with all sorts of other things that then become a problem.
Yeah.
You know, people who actually do have substance abuse problems and want help, it's very difficult for them to get that. I mean, it's just all of these compounding issues, but it's fascinating, some of the work that's been done around that, because you can actually see these charts of when laws around opiates have been increasingly restricted, you see more deaths. And then they restrict them more, and then you see more deaths, and then they restrict them more, and you see more deaths, and they keep doing it. It's like, just look at the chart. Look at this. Like, maybe it sounds good to you that you're doing this, but like, it's not working. So
that's frustrating and scary.
Yeah. But again, yes, when you bring in more state, when you bring in more government, it's rarely the way to make things better.
And you know what? Like, they're just people who are looking to keep their jobs. You know what I mean? Like, they're not looking out for the people. They're looking out for themselves. And it's just like, I don't know, anybody in any industry who wants to, you know, you got to keep your work going, right? You got to, like,
incentives matter.
Yeah.
Incentives matter, certainly. So like, that's one of the things, like, why don't we see more politicians get into government who are more libertarian? There's a number of different reasons, but the two biggest ones I would suggest, I mean, this is my theorizing.
Vermin Supreme. He ruined it for everybody with the boot on his head.
Yeah, so definitely the boot is not appealing to most people, I would argue. I'm a libertarian, and I got to tell you, that is a turnoff for me, for libertarianism.
Yeah, I interviewed him. He's a kooky man.
Right, yeah. Like, one, it's this idea that, like, it's just kooky and weird and not understanding what it is. But it's also, you've got these two incentive structures that are at play. And one of them is that when something is bad, just do something. Right? We don't know what it's going to be, but it can't be do nothing and figure it out. You have to do something, right? Whether or not it's going to work. So that sort of, then you pass these policies, they may not work, they get locked in, they become harder and harder to change. Then you pass another one on top of that, another one on top of that, another one on top of that. And certainly part of the problem too, with that, is that libertarians feed into this, because a lot of libertarians will point to all of the problems that government creates in society. But what they don't do is they don't also lift up examples of civil society fixing those problems. If you just end at, well, civil society will fix that, but you're not doing it, then what, right? If you're saying stuff like, oh, okay, well, we don't need the welfare state because people will donate, but then you personally don't donate, and you know, you're like actively against homeless people in your community, you're not trying to help it, like, that doesn't really like ring true for people, right? So that's on the one. Your other incentive structure is that, you know, politicians, that's their job. They're not going to want to go into government and get rid of their job. They're not there to decrease their power and influence. They're there because at the end of the day, they want to continue to be there. And so it's very difficult, even if they might have somewhat libertarian ideas, to then go into the structure, move against it, move in a way that people get angry because they're saying you're not doing anything. And then actually try to cut away bits of their own power and influence. Like, that's not a very human thing to do.
So it's almost like, yeah, libertarians are trying to get into this two-party game, and they're so different that they can't. So
there's that, and there's also, like, it is a two-party game. Like, the rules are fixed. The rules are fixed to make it so much easier for the Democrats and the Republicans to be able to be on the ballot, to like get any sort of influence over anything in most situations. And it's not just libertarians. I mean, like the Green Party, all of these other groups are face just the same type of uphill structure, where they have to work doubly, triply, quadruply hard to hit those same things just in the voting structure.
Wow. What did you think of Jo Jorgenson?
I liked Jo Jorgenson, definitely. I thought she was a good candidate. I wish she'd had more airtime. I wish she'd had more time.
I tried to get her on my podcast. She was like, I can only do 20 minutes. I was like, what?
Right. Yeah. And I think she was out there, but like, and this was also just like a very weird year. I will say I like Gary Johnson. I liked him when I saw him speak for the first time, 2009 at the Drug Policy Alliance International Conference. Saw that guy, and he was currently Republican governor, or I think he just retired as governor of New Mexico. And I was looking at him and I was like, I think that guy's going to run for president. I want to vote for him. Liked him. I voted for him twice. I will admit to that. But that 2016 election, I was disappointed, to be honest. I feel like that was the best possible chance to go out there and make a really good, strong case for liberty, right? A really strong case for what are the things that libertarians stand for and what this means and all of these different types of things. And he did that to some extent, but I think to some extent the campaign was almost treated like a joke. And that was very frustrating for me because I felt like libertarianism has never had a better chance to be on a mainstream stage. In the election that had the two most hated candidates in history, like this is the time to be going out there and being like, here is what libertarians believe and why, and this is not the time to be making jokes about it.
Yeah, and it sucks. It feels like libertarians are never given a fair chance or a fair platform or like invited on where there's tons of Republican Democratic candidates, and you're like, ugh. A lot of people probably feel like there's not a third option. They probably just think,
it's frustrating. It's frustrating, right? And I'm not associated with the Libertarian Party. I think I'm a registered Libertarian voter, and I do vote for Libertarians. I've also voted for Democrats. I've voted for Republicans. I've probably voted for all sorts of different third parties, stuff like that. Again, I like to look at their platform and their history and pick. I will admit it's oftentimes the Libertarian that is most similar to what I'm looking for, but like I'm not associated with the party, but like I think part of the issue is also like the people who are part of the party. I think that they have very different visions for what the Libertarian Party is for, right? I think that there is a group of people who believe the Libertarian Party's role is to go in there and win elections and move policy, move the Overton window, the window of acceptable policy towards a more libertarian world. And there are also the people who think the role of the Libertarian Party is to make a mockery of this idea of politics and this idea of elections,
which doesn't help really. Like I get it.
In the same party is like that's just a recipe for it. You can't do both those things at once. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Like you can't have a boot on your head and ask to be taken seriously and have people think that you're going to be changing a huge system.
Yes.
Like, yes, I understand the theater part of it and like the artistic part of it of making people see you a certain way, but like that's just not a practical solution.
Right. Yes, exactly. So that's what I was talking about when I talk about stuff like liberty maximizing, right? That's how I'm a pretty pragmatic person. I like to make change where I can make change, right? And so stuff like this, like I've worked on campaigns to legalize cannabis, for example, and like you'll get people who say things like, so for instance, I worked on the 2010 campaign in California to legalize adult recreational cannabis. I was the Bay Area regional director, so I worked on the field campaign for a lot of Northern California. We narrowly lost. It was extremely frustrating to me because a lot of the people who were coming out against it were people who actually do support cannabis use and were against, and even people who support cannabis being legal, but just didn't like it. This one, right? How it was written. And a lot of the things that you get is stuff like, and you get this from like libertarians all the time that are saying, oh, well, I don't support legal cannabis because they're going to tax it. It's like, yes, I don't like taxes either, but you know what's better what's worse than paying taxes, paying a sales tax? Going to prison.
True. That is worse.
Yeah. So it's like, it's one of those where it's like, yes, that is not the ideal policy, right? Like if I could snap my fingers and change the world, I would not be having a sales tax on your cannabis.
Of course.
But you know what?
They're like
You know,
all or
what I was saying
nothing.
before that is people not having people with guns kicking down their doors, throwing smoke bombs in their babies' cribs, and dragging them off to prison. That's clearly a way worse, way less free world.
So you feel like incremental progress is lost in the sort of like libertarian idealism.
I think so. I mean, I just said I was pragmatist. I think I'm also an idealist. Like, I certainly I believe in liberty. I'm an anarchist. But I'm an anarchist who, like I said, I vote. I participate in campaigns because you make changes where you can make changes.
Right.
I don't want to wake up tomorrow and the state is gone, because I don't think that we're at that point where that's going to move us in a great direction. I want to eliminate the need for a state.
Right. Which to me, it sounds like, yeah, incremental progress is the way to do that, because it's too big.
It's a lot less flashy. It's a lot more work. And it requires a lot more nose to the grindstone, constant daily stuff. And that's not fun for the people who want to come out and be an edgelord.
Of course. Yeah. And you have to sort of be part of the system, like get in it to help change it, which is like, if you don't like it, you're like, but you got to get in there and get your hands dirty. Do you feel like, Kat, like the last year and a half with the lockdowns and people being like acutely aware of their rights being stripped away, do you think that's been good for the Libertarian Party or the Libertarian movement, because people are actually like, it's in their face that they, that the state is oppressive?
I don't know. This is actually something I've been thinking about back and forth. I feel like there's positives and there's also negatives. And I think there's also the way that a lot of people have reacted to a lot of things has maybe not been the best, right? For one, so I don't support mandates really across the board. I don't like the idea of mandates. I believe in free markets. I believe in capitalism. I believe things like that. But so a lot of people will say those things and then say, but if your store tells me that you have to wear a mask to come inside, I will refuse to do so. And I will say that is a violation. It's like, well, they own that store. That is their store. They are allowed to have a requirement of a mask. If someone wants to embrace these policies, that's fine. I think, even stuff like vaccines, I think it's great that there are vaccines available. I think it's great that people should be able to access them. I don't think anyone should be forced to take any. I think that there's this, again, it's a sort of middle ground, and it turns into this big culture war thing. So that's certainly a concern. I talked a little bit about how I think that there has been some advantages of this whole lockdown, just in the sense that we've seen now, for the most part, that working from home is actually very viable. A lot of people were expecting productivity to go down it actually went up for a lot of people. Markets did really well.
Because they have quality of life.
We kind of were pushing back against this old guard idea again, that there's only one correct way to work. So I think that's going to build a lot more flexibility in. We saw a lot of regulations being relaxed around things like being able to order alcohol, get alcohol delivery, being able to do things like around medicine. Actually, a lot of states relaxed occupational licensing laws when there was crises in their state, to allow doctors and nurses who are licensed in the next state over, where they weren't having these crises, to come in and work and help people. So I think those kinds of things, those are going to be positives for our society if we're able to learn those lessons and keep those deregulatory initiatives as well. I'm a little worried that they won't. I do think we're also certainly with the gosh, I can't believe I suddenly forgot the name of this. With the cash payments that everyone's getting direct to their yes, stimulus. Thank you. Thank you. Of course, I'd forget the one important word that I need. The stimulus. Okay. I mean, I think stuff like that can sort of, it's certainly a strong case for socialism for people who have a weak understanding of what that is. If we're sort of building into our government, that government pays everyone a certain check, certain time of the month. You can also make a case that, if the government is also refusing to let you go out and work and shutting down your business, then
Mhm.
there has been a taking that maybe they should compensate you for it, right? So,
Right.
but like certainly the role of the state has gotten a lot bigger in a lot of ways. That's concerning, but I think
Yeah.
it's also shrunk in certain ways. And hopefully we'll learn those lessons. Hopefully we will change things in that degree as well. But yeah, so I'm not sure at the end of it whether we've moved in a more liberty maximizing or minimizing direction because of the pandemic, but I think that there are lessons that we can get from it that hopefully will move us in a better direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's still like, I agree with you, maybe too soon to tell on some of these things, like what
Mhm.
the final outcome will be. Well, this is so interesting, Kat. This is like such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Where can people find you, follow you, and learn more about Feminists for Liberty?
Absolutely. So I'm Kat Murti. That's Katmurti. You can find me at Kat Murti on Twitter and Facebook. And you can find Feminists for Liberty at feministsforliberty.com. And we are at Feminists for Liberty on Facebook and Instagram, and at Feminist Liberty on Twitter. We are also a 501c3 nonprofit, and we are entirely funded by small donations from folks. So if you like the work that we're doing, we check it out. Please send us a couple dollars. It goes a long way.
Oh, great. Wow. And I like that all of your handles are the same. Like, you'd be amazed with how many people are like, the handles are different on every platform. And I'm always
That's
like,
the worst for me on Instagram, where my personal one is not my actual name. But there's so many people who like, I clearly know them in real life, but their handle is not their name, and they only post photos of like cool trees or something. And I'm like, who is this person? Who is this person?
well, Kat, thank you so much for coming on the show. Oh man, good luck with your baby. I will be
Thank
looking
you.
out for photos. And yeah, I'm so happy for you. And yeah, this was such a great conversation.
This is so much fun. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks. Bye.